In the glittering palace of Versailles, a smell was overpowering the cloying perfume. It was the smell of death. It was the smell of the Sun King, Louis XIV, literally rotting alive in his own bed. His leg, which once danced in the great ballets of the court, was now a blackened, festering mass of gangrene. It was a sight so horrific, it turned the stomachs of his most devoted servants. The man who had famously declared, "I am the state," who built an empire and defined an age, was being eaten alive by his own body. But how did the most powerful monarch in the world, a man who called himself a god on earth, come to such a gruesome, undignified end? To understand the horror of his final days, you have to remember the sheer glory he commanded. For 72 years, Louis XIV was France. His reign was the longest of any monarch in European history. He was the Sun King, and Versailles was his personal universe, a golden monument to his absolute power. But no amount of gold could stop the enemy that was coming for him. An enemy that would expose the primitive, brutal reality of 18th century medicine and prove that even kings are made of flesh and blood. It all started with a simple pain. On August 10th, 1715, after a long day of hunting, the king, just weeks away from his 77th birthday, felt a sharp pain in his left leg. His personal physician, Guy Crescent Fagan, was called. Now, Fagan had the king's complete trust, but his medical playbook was tragically short. For almost any problem, he had 3 solutions: bleeding, purging, and enemas. Fagan examined the royal leg and made his diagnosis: sciatica, a common complaint for a man the king's age. He prescribed some purgatives and told the king to rest. But the pain didn't go away. It got worse, settling into a deep, agonizing throb that was always in the same spot. Louis, ever the performer, tried to carry on. He held court, he led council meetings, he walked the gilded halls of Versailles, trying to project that old, unshakable strength even as the pain became unbearable. But the mask was starting to slip. Soon, the king couldn't even make the short walk to the chambers of his wife, Madame de Maintenon. The court, which was basically a high-stakes gossip factory, started whispering. They saw the king's struggle, the grimace of pain he couldn't hide anymore. Over in London, bookies started taking bets on how long the Sun King had left. Still, Fagan stubbornly clung to his diagnosis. He prescribed ass's milk, then decided against it. He ordered the king's leg to be bathed in spiced burgundy wine. Nothing worked. The king was getting weaker. And then, sinister black marks began to appear on his leg, the undeniable sign of gangrene. What the doctors had been afraid to admit was now staring them in the face. The king's leg was rotting while he was still alive. Senile gangrene, a condition where tissue dies from a lack of blood flow, was a death sentence in the 18th century. With no concept of germs or antibiotics, doctors were completely helpless. The scene in the king's bedchamber turned into a waking nightmare. As the gangrene crept up his leg, the stench of decay grew so overpowering that servants bringing him food had to hold handkerchiefs to their faces. The king's top surgeon, Georges Maréchal, saw it for what it was. He knew the only sliver of hope was amputation. But by the time he and a team of surgeons were finally given control, it was too late. The infection had spread too far, too deep. It was already in the bone. Amputating now would just be a faster way to kill him. Louis's entire life had been a tour of 18th century medical suffering. He'd survived a nasty case of smallpox that scarred his face. He suffered from gout agonizing dental abscesses, and even a painful anal fistula that required a brutal surgery years earlier. His body had been weakened by decades of pointless bleedings and purges. This final illness was just the grim finale of a lifetime of medical ignorance. Confined to his bed from August 25th, Louis had to face the terrifying truth of his own mortality. He, the man who commanded armies and shaped nations, was now a prisoner in his own decaying body. He asked his surgeon point blank how much time he had left. Maréchal, brutally honest, told him 2 days at most. As the infection consumed him, the king who once represented the splendor of France was reduced to a blackened, bloated, and decomposing man, begging for the end to come. Even in agony, Louis XIV decided to die as he had lived, like a king. He was putting on his final performance, and all of Versailles was his audience. On August 26th, he ordered his great-grandson to be brought to his deathbed. This was the 5-year-old boy who would become King Louis XV. Looking at his tiny successor, the dying king offered a piece of advice that was a stunning rejection of his own life's work. "My child," he said, his voice faint, "you are going to be a great king. Do not imitate me in my love of building, nor in my love of war. Try to live in peace with your neighbors. Lighten your people's burden as soon as you can, and do what I have had the misfortune not to do myself." It was a shocking admission of regret from a king whose constant wars and insane spending had nearly bankrupted his country. The court held its breath. The end of an era was here. Factions were already maneuvering for power. For a week, the king held court from his bed, saying his goodbyes. At one point, a con artist from Provence named Brune was allowed in, offering a bottle of so-called miracle elixir. For a brief moment after drinking it, the king seemed to rally. But it was a fleeting hope. The gangrene was unstoppable. In his last conscious moments, Louis looked at the nobles who were weeping dramatically by his bedside and uttered his famous last words. "Why do you weep? Did you think I was immortal?" On September 1st, 1715, just after 8:15 in the morning, 4 days shy of his 77th birthday, the Sun King died. His last breath wasn't a sigh of resignation, but a gasp of relief from the unimaginable pain. The death of Louis XIV sent a shockwave across Europe. It was the end of the longest and most powerful reign the continent had ever seen. What followed was political chaos. With the throne passing to a 5-year-old boy, France was facing a power vacuum that would destabilize the monarchy for years. Louis left a complicated legacy. He had centralized France, expanded its territory, and presided over a golden age of art. But he also left the nation drowning in debt and fractured by his brutal persecution of Protestants. The absolute monarchy he perfected had sown the seeds of the revolution that would erupt decades later. And the fate of his own body would become a grim metaphor for the fate of his dynasty. During the French Revolution, in 1793, angry mobs stormed the Basilica of Saint-Denis, the burial place of French kings. They were determined to erase every symbol of the monarchy. So they pulled the kings from their tombs. When they opened Louis XIV's coffin, they found his body, interred for nearly 80 years, had turned dark and was badly decomposed. The remains of the Sun King were unceremoniously dumped into a mass grave with his ancestors and covered with quicklime. But the story of his heart is even stranger. As was tradition, his heart had been removed and kept separately. During the revolution, It was sold to an artist who wanted to use it to make a rich brown paint glaze called mummy brown. He only used a small piece. The rest of the shriveled heart was eventually acquired by Lord Harcourt, the Archbishop of York in England. At a dinner party in 1848, Harcourt proudly passed the royal relic around for his guests to see. When it reached the eccentric naturalist and Dean of Westminster, William Buckland, he reportedly said, "I have eaten many strange things, but I have never eaten the heart of a king before." And before anyone could stop him, he popped it in his mouth and ate it. The death of Louis XIV was more than the end of a life. It was the end of an illusion. The illusion of the divine, untouchable monarch. A figure who floated above the filth and decay of normal life. His agonizing, disgusting, and all too human death from gangrene shattered that image. It revealed that underneath the powdered wigs and silken clothes, a king was just a man. His fall from the pinnacle of earthly glory to a rotting corpse marked the symbolic dawn of a new era. One that would question the very nature of power, and ultimately wash it all away in a tide of revolution. If you found this dive into the gruesome side of royalty compelling, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more stories that reveal the dark truths hidden behind the pages of history. And let us know in the comments, what part of the Sun King's final days did you find the most shocking?